1824. Somewhere north of Santa Fe, a man named Pablo Montoya signs his name to a document. The Mexican government hands him 655,000 acres of grass, mesa, and creek bed. Wind across the caprock. The Canadian River carving red canyons. Silence thick enough to hear your own heartbeat. 290,000 deeded acres. 453 square miles, one fence, one brand, roughly 5,000 head of cattle, reported 117 wells, 342 miles of fence line, 530 miles of roads that go nowhere except deeper into the ranch. Stunning. A country unto itself. But that country has a price, and the price is not measured in dollars. The price is measured in the question of whether a place this large can ever truly belong to anyone, or whether it simply outlasts whoever tries. Is Bell Ranch a monument to vision and persistence? Or is it a lesson in what the land takes from those who try to hold it? There are other ranch empires out there, other stories of land and labor and the people who tried to hold them together. If you know one worth exploring, subscribe and leave its name below. Chapter 1. The Land That Doesn't End. Bell Ranch sits in a transition zone. To the east, the Great Plains roll toward Texas, flat, wind-scoured, treeless, except along the draws. To the west, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rise toward 13,000 feet, catching moisture that the lowlands never see. Bell Ranch catches neither the plains' consistency nor the mountains' water. It catches what falls between. The terrain is not flat. Mesas rise and fall. Canyons cut through red rock. La Cinta Creek has carved a valley through the center of the ranch over geological time, and smaller drainages branch off it like capillaries from an artery. The Canadian River marks the northern boundary with canyons deep enough to hide an army. The grass is not lush. It is short grass prairie, mixed with desert species, blue grama, buffalo grass, side oats grama, little blue stem in the better draws. The grass has evolved to survive long dry spells, to green up fast when rain comes, to go dormant when it does not. It is tough grass. It does not forgive overgrazing. The elevation helps. At 4,200 to 5,600 feet above sea level, the temperatures are cooler than the desert floors to the south. Summer highs rarely exceed 100 degrees. Winter can bring snow and ice that closes roads and isolates the ranch camps. The vegetation changes with elevation. Lower pastures run toward desert scrub, creosote, mesquite, yucca, cactus. Higher pastures carry more grass, sometimes with scattered juniper and pinyon pine. The headquarters sits at an elevation where the transition is visible in every direction. Wildlife moves through. Mule deer, pronghorn antelope, elk in some years, drifting down from higher country. Coyotes in every pasture, mountain lions in the canyons, hawks riding thermals, ravens watching from fence posts. This is not gentle country. It is beautiful in its harshness, dramatic in its scale, unforgiving in its demands. The ranchers who have worked it for 150 years did not choose it because it was easy. They chose it because it was available, and they stayed because they learned to love what it offered. What it offered was space. What it demanded was adaptation. Chapter 2. A ranch bigger than a state. Bell Ranch runs like a distributed factory laid across a landscape larger than many counties. 7 operating units, 5 campmen stationed across the property. A headquarters crew coordinates movements, repairs, and the twice-yearly gatherings when every available hand converges. They are divisions of an empire, each one larger than most ranches in the eastern half of the country. A single manager, a man named Bert Ansell, who would later become general manager, personally oversaw 112,000 acres as the headquarters unit alone. 112,000 acres, one man's responsibility. That is roughly 175 square miles of terrain to know, to monitor, to manage. Each unit carries 600 to 1,000 head of cattle. Each unit has its own water points, its own corrals, its own problems. A broken windmill in one unit cannot wait for a crew to finish work in another unit 20 miles away. A cow having trouble calving cannot wait for help that is half a day's ride distant. The camp men live on the land. They are stationed at remote locations across the property, maintaining the infrastructure, monitoring the cattle, becoming extensions of the ranch's nervous system, human sensors, monitoring an operation too large for any single person to see. Support roles fill the gaps. A heavy equipment operator maintains roads, clears brush, repairs damage from storms that can wash out a road in an hour. A full-time caretaker maintains the buildings and grounds at headquarters. The ranch is a small town unto itself, with all the maintenance that small towns require. Branding and roundup reveal the true scale. When it is time to gather cattle, when it is time to work calves, the entire ranch converges. There is no other way. A single crew cannot muscle that much country. The distances are too great. The cattle are too scattered. The work is too intense. A chuck wagon, a hoodlum wagon carrying bedrolls and extra saddles. Cowboys ride ranch-bred quarter horses from a remuda of about 150 head. 150 horses. That is not a breeding program, that is a working fleet. Each cowboy needs multiple mounts because no single horse can work cattle in this country day after day without rest. The horses rotate. The work continues. Chapter 3. Myth versus Reality. There is a black and white photograph from the 1940s, a cowboy healing a calf, the dust frozen in mid-rise, the horse mid-turn, the rope taut between the rider and the calf's hind legs. For years, that image adorned Stetson hat boxes across America. The cowboy in the photograph was Mark Woods, described as the longtime wagon boss of Bell Ranch. Most Americans who saw that image never knew the ranch existed. They saw the hat. They saw the cowboy. They saw the romance of the West, the freedom, the skill, the self-reliance that the cowboy image has represented since the late 19th century. They did not see the up to 45 acres per cow. They did not see the reported 117 wells. They did not see the drought years when the grass stayed brown and the cattle had to be sold at a loss. They did not see the balance sheets or the creditor negotiations or the restructurings that kept the ranch alive through hard times. The photograph is the postcard version. The story is what happens when the photograph is put away and the work continues. Bell Ranch has been claimed as a filming location. Some accounts mention the television series Rawhide. Others mention Marlboro advertising in the 1970s. These claims appear in promotional materials but are difficult to verify against production records. The West has 1,000 ranches that claim film history, and the documentation is often thin. What is verifiable is that the landscape has been used to sell something: the West, the cowboy, the idea that there is still country vast enough to disappear into, still work hard enough to test a man, still freedom enough to be worth seeking. The marketing works because the reality is real. 453 square miles, one fence, one brand, country that does not care about your mythology, but will let you photograph it anyway. Chapter 4. The First Rules of Survival. The land did not begin with Pablo Montoya. It did not begin with the Mexican government or the Spanish government or any government at all. The land was here before the concept of ownership existed, and people were using it. Comanche, Kiowa, Apache. The peoples who moved through this country for generations before anyone thought to draw lines on paper. They understood something about the landscape that the later ranchers would have to learn. This is transitional country, seasonal country, country that rewards movement and punishes permanence. The evidence remains. Petroglyphs on canyon walls, marks left by people who watched from the high ground for buffalo herds moving across the plains below. Stone tools in the creek beds, fire rings in sheltered overhangs. The land remembers them even if the later owners did not. The marketing materials for Bell Ranch mention these peoples carefully, as historical color, as evidence of the land's significance. What they do not mention is the displacement that made the ranch possible. The Comanche Wars, the military campaigns, the reservations, the systematic removal of peoples who had used this land for centuries to make room for peoples who had just arrived. This is the foundation beneath the foundation. Before the land grant, before the legal battles, before the brand and the fences and the wells and the infrastructure of empire, there was a different way of using this country, a way that did not require ownership because it did not require permanence. The cattle operation demands permanence. It demands fences. It demands wells because the natural water is unreliable. It demands the apparatus of property because the whole operation depends on knowing where your cattle are and keeping other people's cattle out. The peoples who came before did not need these things. They moved with the game. They used the water where they found it. They left when the grass was eaten and came back when it recovered. Whether their way was better or worse is not a question that can be answered simply. It is a question of values, a question of what land is for, a question of whether permanence is progress or just a different kind of demand on a landscape that has never been easy. The petroglyphs still watch from the canyon walls. They have outlasted every owner so far. They will likely outlast the owners yet to come. Chapter 5. Water is the real fence. Ask any rancher in dry country what keeps them awake at night, and the answer is always the same. Water, not cattle prices, not feed costs, not labor. Water. Bell Ranch controls significant surface water access by the standards of this region. 12 miles along the Canadian River, where the water cuts through red rock canyons and cottonwoods, line the banks. 13 miles of frontage on Conscious Lake, a reservoir created by a dam built in the 1930s. More than 30 miles of La Cinta Creek, running through the center of the property, though the creek may be dry for months at a time in drought years. Smaller creeks adding tens of miles more. On paper, this looks like abundance. In practice, surface water is not enough. Not in country where rainfall averages 15 inches a year and evaporation steals most of it before it can reach a creek. The infrastructure numbers tell the hidden story. Reported 117 wells and windmills, approximately 206 stock tanks, roughly 90 miles of pipeline. 117 wells, each one drilled into the earth at substantial cost, each one requiring a pump or a windmill to bring water to the surface, each one requiring maintenance, parts wear out, pumps fail, pipes crack, windmills break in high wind. 206 stock tanks, earthen dams and concrete basins scattered across 453 square miles, each one designed to catch runoff, store water, and provide drinking points for cattle that cannot walk too far from grass to water and back. Each tank requires clearing, mud, debris, the slow accumulation of silt that shrinks capacity year by year if no one attends to it. Each tank requires monitoring for leaks, for damage, for the simple fact that a tank that held water last month may not hold water this month. 90 miles of pipeline, buried water lines connecting wells to tanks to pastures where cattle need to drink. Every foot of that pipeline can freeze in winter. Every foot can crack from age or settling ground. Every foot represents a failure point in infrastructure that cannot afford failure when the temperature drops and the cattle have nowhere else to drink. Now picture what one failure looks like. A windmill seizes or a pump burns out, and a tank that held water yesterday goes dry by afternoon. The cattle start walking, first to the next water, then past the next, until the whole herd funnels into the same few watered pastures. Grass disappears fast when every hoof is forced into the same places, and the rest of the ranch might as well be locked behind an invisible fence. Suddenly, the day isn't about water access at all. It's a choice. Fix the well now, haul water, or pull cattle off country that can't wait. Water is not a resource here. Water is the operating constraint. Everything else, the cattle, the genetics, the cowboys, the data, runs on water. Without water, the ranch is not a ranch. It is empty country waiting for rain that may not come. And when the drought comes, the water does not care about your investment. Chapter 6. Fences, Roads, and the Maintenance Web. Water is invisible beneath the surface, but the infrastructure above ground tells its own story. 342 miles of fence, 530 miles of interior roads, 14 sets of shipping pens and corrals, 6 sets of certified scales, 1 40-ton truck scale at the Casa Colorado division. These numbers sound like statistics. They feel different when you are standing at a gate, looking at fence line that disappears over the horizon in both directions, knowing that a break anywhere along those hundreds of miles means cattle drifting where they should not be. 530 miles of private roads, not county roads, not state highways. Private roads, built and maintained by the ranch, to connect headquarters to camps, camps to pastures, pastures to pens. Roads that exist on no map except the one in the manager's head. These roads are not asphalt. They are graded dirt, graveled in places, washed out after heavy rain, rutted after heavy use. They require constant attention, grading, filling, drainage maintenance, or they become impassable when you need them most. The equipment fleet required to maintain this infrastructure is its own line item. Graders, loaders, welders, post-hole diggers, fencing tools, pipe-cutting equipment. The ranch employs a full-time heavy equipment operator. Another person is dedicated to buildings and grounds. These are not cattle positions. These are infrastructure positions. The cattle cannot survive without the infrastructure that keeps the water flowing and the fences standing. A ranch this size cannot be managed by driving the perimeter. The perimeter is too large. The interior is too complex. The operating units function semi-independently precisely because no one can be everywhere at once. Each campman is responsible for his unit. 600 to 1,000 head, 8,000 to 20,000 acres, depending on the unit. A house to live in, a string of horses to ride, a territory to know better than anyone else knows it, every water point, every salt lick, every gate, every place where cattle like to hide when it is time to gather them. The headquarters unit alone covers 112,000 acres. One manager oversees it. One person responsible for more land than many counties contain. This is not a job for someone who wants to see other people. This is a job for someone who is comfortable with distance, with silence, with the particular solitude of country that goes on forever in every direction. The roads connect the camps. The phones connect the people. The logistics connect the decisions. But the daily experience is distance, riding alone, checking cattle alone, fixing fence alone, waiting for the rare days when all hands gather and the work feels collective again. Chapter 7. The Workforce You Don't See. In a country where distances are measured in hours, not miles, the horse is not a symbol. It is a tool, a necessity, a partner that earns its keep or gets replaced. Bell Ranch maintains approximately 150 ranch-bred quarter horses in its working remuda. These are not show horses. They are not pleasure horses. They are athletes bred for a specific job in specific terrain. The terrain matters. Mesa country, canyon country, rocky footing and steep descents. A horse that can work flat ground may stumble and fall when the land tilts. A horse that panics in brush is useless when you need to push cattle through cedars. A horse that cannot cover ground efficiently will wear out before the work is done. The breeding program at Bell was designed to produce horses that fit the land. Horses with the bone to carry a rider all day. Horses with the temperament to work cattle without excessive excitement. Horses with the sense to pick their way through rough country without being told where to put their feet. In 2002, the Ranching Heritage Association awarded Bell Ranch the Best Remuda Award. The horses were not purchased from breeders. They were bred on the ranch, trained on the ranch, worked on the ranch until they understood the country as well as the men who rode them. A ranch this size cannot function without good horses. Trucks and four-wheelers have their place, covering distance on roads, hauling supplies, checking water. But when it comes time to gather cattle from a 20,000-acre pasture, when it comes time to sort pairs through brush and canyon, when it comes time to rope and doctor sick animals in rough country, those jobs require horses. The cowboys ride. That is not nostalgia. That is logistics. Each of the 5 campmen maintains a string of horses. Each horse has its specialty, the one that ropes well, the one that handles brush, the one that covers ground, the one that works gates. The cowboy knows which horse to saddle for which job. The horse knows what is expected. When the whole ranch gathers for branding, when all hands converge because no single crew can work that much country alone, the remuda swells to dozens of horses working in rotation. Fresh horses throughout the day. Tired horses turned out. The work continues. There is a support vehicle called a hoodlum wagon that follows the work. It carries bedrolls and extra saddles. Spare equipment. The things a cowboy might need when camp is 20 miles from headquarters and the job lasts a week. This is not a dude ranch. This is not a movie set. This is a working operation where the horses earn their feed and the cowboys earn their wages by doing the same job their predecessors did a century ago, moving cattle across country that has not gotten any smaller or any easier. Chapter 8. Cattle as a Calculation. There is a number that explains Bell Ranch better than any acreage total or sale price or head count. Up to 45 acres. That is how much land it takes to support a single cow-calf pair on this ranch in a typical year. Up to 45 acres of mesa, canyon, and grass for one mother cow and her calf to survive 12 months. In wetter country, central Texas, the Flint Hills of Kansas, the Sand Hills of Nebraska, the number might be 5 acres, 10 acres, maybe 15 in marginal country. At Bell Ranch, it is up to 45. This single fact shapes everything. It shapes the size of the pastures, 8,000 to 20,000 acres for calving country alone. It shapes the distance between water points, Cattle cannot walk too far for a drink, or they burn more energy than they gain from grazing. It shapes the number of cowboys required to check on cattle that may be scattered across terrain larger than some eastern counties. At full capacity, Bell Ranch can run about 5,000 cow-calf pairs. That sounds like a large operation, and it is. But spread that 5,000 head across 290,000 acres, and the density becomes clear. The math works out to roughly 17 pairs per square mile. 17 mothers and their calves walking country that stretches 453 square miles in every direction. This is not a pasture. This is a territory. This is a country unto itself, with its own geography, its own weather patterns, its own rules that visitors learn quickly or suffer the consequences. The men who work this land do not check cows by driving a pickup along a fence line and counting heads. They ride. They cover ground that takes days, not hours. They understand that a sick calf in country this big may not be found for days, if it is found at all. They understand that a broken windmill means cattle walking miles to the next water, burning weight they cannot afford to lose. The 45-acre number is not a complaint. It is simply the reality. The land sets the terms. The rancher agrees to them or finds different country. By the 1990s, Bell Ranch had evolved beyond tradition. The cowboys still rode. The chuck wagon still rolled during spring works. The brand still burned into hides the same way it had for over a century. But underneath the romance, a different operation was taking shape. Every calf born on the ranch received an electronic identification tag, a small device attached to the ear that could be read by a scanner, linking that calf to a database entry that would follow it for life. Every calf sired by a yearling bull was DNA tested for parentage verification. In country this big, with cattle scattered across pastures the size of small states, knowing which bull sired which calf was not obvious. The DNA testing made it certain. Every cow in the herd carried data points, expected progeny differences, performance weights, tenderness markers, longevity projections. Information that predicted how that cow's calves would perform, how long she would stay productive, whether her genetics were worth keeping in the herd. This was ranching reimagined as a feedback loop, performance data flowing from the pasture to the database, influencing breeding decisions that would shape the herd years into the future. The shift had started decades earlier. A manager named George Ellis had pioneered the approach back in the 1950s, introducing 205-day weights, when most ranches still judged cattle by how they looked. A cow that looked good might not produce calves that gained efficiently. A cow that looked average might throw calves that outperformed expectations. Ellis wanted data, not guesswork. His successors built on that foundation. Performance testing, carcass data from packing plants, the long, slow process of turning intuition into information. By 2006, the main production herd numbered close to 4,000 cows. A separate seed stock herd held about 400 females, breeding stock for producing bulls that would sire the next generation. The ranch had built its own composite breed, called Bell Red, blending English and continental genetics with a touch of Brahman influence to fit arid forage. A touch of Brahman. That phrase carries weight. Brahman cattle tolerate heat. They handle rough country. They bring hardiness that purebred British breeds sometimes lack in environments like northeastern New Mexico. But Brahman influence also changes carcass quality. Too much Brahman and the beef grades lower at the packing plant, less marbling, tougher texture, lower prices. The balance is everything. Enough heat tolerance to survive, not so much influence that the final product loses value. The data operation was designed to find that balance, to track which cows produced calves that gained weight efficiently in the pasture and still graded choice at slaughter, to identify which bulls threw offspring that could walk 45 acres for every bite of grass and still finish into quality beef. This is not a hobby ranch. This is an industrial operation wearing a cowboy hat, using technology to solve problems that tradition alone could not solve. Chapter 9. Weather as a Boss. Fight. There is a phrase that appears in almost every story written about Bell Ranch in the 21st century. Long and enduring drought. The ranch can carry 5,000 pairs at full capacity. It has the grass for 5,000 pairs in a normal year when the monsoons arrive in July, when August brings its usual 4 or 5 inches, when the grass comes back green and the stock tanks fill. But there have not been many normal years. When the rain does not come in July, the grass does not come back green. It stays brown, it stays dry, it stays insufficient, and the calculation changes. 5,000 pairs becomes 4,000. 4,000 becomes 3,500. 3,500 becomes a prayer that the drought breaks before the grass runs out entirely. Conservative stocking. That is the polite phrase for what happens in drought years. It means selling cattle you wanted to keep. It means watching the price of calves drop at the auction because every other rancher in dry country is selling at the same time. It means taking less money for animals you raised because everyone is desperate and the buyers know it. It means carrying debt through another year because the revenue did not match the plan. It means hoping that next year will be different, knowing that next year might be the same. A rancher named Don Hoffman, who managed Bell from 1970 to 1986, understood this better than most. He developed the water systems, the cross-fencing, the handling facilities that would let the ranch flex with the weather. His philosophy was simple: build the infrastructure to run more cattle in wet years, but design the operation so you can pull back without destroying the grass in dry years. The grass is the capital. If you spend the grass, if you overgraze it, if you run too many cattle through drought and destroy the root systems, you have nothing left to spend. The recovery takes years, sometimes decades. Sometimes the grass never comes back the same. This is the tension that defines every decision on a ranch this size. You can push for production. You can run more cattle. You can make more money in the short term, or you can protect the grass. Stock conservatively. Leave money on the table today so there is grass to harvest tomorrow. The land does not forgive those who choose short-term profit. The land remembers, and the land waits. What does drought look like from the back of a horse? It looks like cattle standing at empty tanks, waiting for water that is not coming. It looks like calves that should weigh 500 pounds at weaning, weighing 400 because the cows did not have enough milk because the grass did not have enough nutrition. It looks like dead animals, not many, but some, that could not survive what the weather demanded. It looks like tough decisions. Which pasture gets the water from the working well when 2 pastures need it? Which cattle get sold first when you have to reduce numbers? Which employees get laid off when the revenue does not support the payroll? It looks like expense without return. Feed bills mounting because the grass is gone. Trucking costs because you have to haul cattle to pastures that still have something to eat. Vet bills because stressed animals get sick. The costs do not stop because the rain stops. The costs accelerate, and then the rain comes back. Eventually, it always comes back. The grass greens, the tanks fill, the cattle gain weight again, and the rancher thinks, Maybe we can rebuild the numbers now. Maybe the drought is over until the next drought, which may be next year, or the year after, or a decade away. No one knows. No one can know. The only certainty is that it will come again, and the operation has to be ready. This is the rhythm of ranching in dry country: expansion and contraction, hope and caution, building toward capacity and pulling back to survive. The land sets the tempo. The rancher follows or fails. Chapter 10: Law, Leases, and the Quiet Paper Empire. Bell Ranch is not a museum. It is not a monument. It is a working operation that must pay its way or cease to exist, but it is also a case study, perhaps several case studies. It is a case study in deed versus lease. Most ultra-large ranches in the American West depend on federal grazing permits, Bureau of Land Management allotments, Forest Service grazing rights, state trust land leases. Bell Ranch is marketed as 100% deeded land with no federal or state intrusion, no permits to renew, no agencies to satisfy, no political winds to navigate when administrations change and grazing policy shifts. That independence has a price. The land must support the operation without subsidy. The water must come from the ranch's own wells, not from federal irrigation projects. The roads must be maintained by the ranch's own crews, not by county or federal road departments. Independence is not free. It is a case study in stewardship versus extraction. The drought forces hard choices every year, and the ranches that survive long-term are the ranches that treat grass like capital, something to preserve and compound, not something to spend and deplete. Conservative stocking, selling cattle before the grass runs out, leaving money on the table in good years so there is grass to harvest in bad years, thinking in decades, not quarters. And it is a case study in empire building without conquest. Land, water, data, logistics. The power is in the operations, not in the story. The brand is a symbol. The infrastructure is the reality. Anyone can register a brand. Few can build the wells and tanks and fences and roads and handling facilities that make a brand mean something. The empire is not the acreage. The empire is the operations that turn acreage into production. Chapter 11: The People Who Tried to Own It. Before there was a ranch, there was a grant. Before there was a brand, there was a signature. Before there was empire, there was paper. In 1824, the Mexican government issued what would become known as the Pablo Montoya Grant. The documentation describes Montoya as a former Spanish Army captain, an aristocrat, a government official in Santa Fe, a man of position in a territory that would change hands within a generation. The grant covered roughly 655,000 acres, more than 1,000 square miles of northeastern New Mexico. It was not farmland, it was not timber country. It was mesa and canyon and grass that turned brown in dry years and green again only if the summer monsoons arrived in July and August. The Comanche knew this country. So did the Kiowa and the Apache. Petroglyphs mark the canyon walls, figures carved into stone by hunters who scanned for buffalo from ridges that gave them a view of everything moving across the flats below. This was strategic ground, high points for observation, water in the creeks for those who knew where to find it, shelter in the canyons when the winter wind cut across the plains. But for the Mexican government, this was not sacred land. It was not strategic land. It was empty land, and empty land was currency. Land grants were how Mexico rewarded loyalty, settled debts, and attempted to populate its northern frontier. Give a man 600,000 acres, and perhaps he would bring settlers. Perhaps he would develop the territory. Perhaps he would create a buffer against the Comanche raids that had plagued the region for generations. Montoya received his grant. Whether he ever truly worked the land is lost to history. Whether he brought settlers or built structures or ran cattle across those 600,000 acres, the records do not say. What the records do say is that within 24 years, everything changed. 1848. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ends the Mexican-American War. California becomes American. So does Arizona. So does New Mexico. And suddenly, every Mexican land grant in the region becomes a legal question mark. The United States recognized some grants. It rejected others. The difference often came down to paperwork, politics, and who had the resources to fight. The Office of the Surveyor General reviewed claims. Congress had to confirm them. Lawyers grew rich on the process, and families who had held land for generations found themselves defending titles in a foreign court system. For the Montoya grant, recognition came through an attorney named John S. Watts. The records describe him helping to secure congressional recognition of the grant and eventually gaining an ownership interest himself. By 1867, Watts had secured title to all the land. This is how empires begin in the American West. Not with cattle, not with cowboys, not with courage or vision or hard work. With lawyers, with paper, with someone who knows how to work the apparatus before the apparatus is even finished being built. The grant was recognized, the title was clean, the land was legal. Now, someone needed to do something with it. Around 1870, a Canadian-born businessman named Wilson Waddingham bought into the grant. Some accounts say he purchased directly from the Montoya family heirs. Others describe a more complicated chain of transactions involving Watts and subsequent owners. The exact sequence matters less than the result. Waddingham arrived with capital and ambition at a moment when the American cattle industry was about to explode. He was not a cowboy. He was an operator. He understood that running cattle on land this vast required more than horses and ropes. It required organization. It required capital. It required a brand. In 1875, a brand was registered in San Miguel County, New Mexico territory. A single iron, a bell, simple enough to burn into a hide with one motion, distinctive enough to recognize from across a canyon. That brand is still in use today, 150 years. Empires risen and fallen, owners changed a half-dozen times. Wars, depressions, droughts that killed thousands of head, prices that made fortunes and destroyed them, and, through all of it, the same bell burned into the same hides on the same land. A brand is not just identification. A brand is continuity. A brand is the claim that what was here before will be here tomorrow. Waddingham understood that the cattle business was changing. The railroad was coming. The days of trailing herds 1,000 miles to market were ending. What mattered now was production, breeding better cattle, fattening them efficiently, getting them to the railhead at the right time. He reorganized the operation multiple times as the business demanded. Fort Bascom Cattle Company, Red River Land and Cattle, Bell Ranch Company. Each restructuring was a way to bring in new investors, stay ahead of creditors, and keep the operation running when margins turned thin. This was the reality of frontier ranching that the dime novels never mentioned. Capital calls, restructuring, the constant scramble for cash flow. The romance of the cowboy happened on the range. The survival of the ranch happened in offices and banks. Waddingham hired a general manager named Michael Slattery to handle the daily operations. Hard driving, relentless. Slattery consolidated holdings by forcing out squatters who had settled on grant land without legal claim. He fenced the perimeter, hundreds of miles of fence to mark where Bell Ranch ended and the rest of the world began. He brought in Durham bulls to breed with the Longhorns, upgrading the herd toward British beef breeds that would command higher prices. He even experimented with irrigation. In a country that averaged 15 inches of rainfall a year, any water you could control was power. This was not romantic cowboy work. This was industrial ranching before the term existed. Scale. Efficiency. The Bell brand was the logo of a corporation, not the symbol of a frontier dream. And then came the English. In the 1870s and 80s, British investors looked at the American West and saw opportunity measured in percentage points. Cattle prices were high. The eastern cities were growing, demanding beef. Land was cheap, practically free if you knew how to work the legal apparatus. The railroads were pushing west, promising easy shipment to markets that would pay premium prices. The numbers looked extraordinary on paper. 10% returns, 15%, 20% in a good year. English and Scottish syndicates bought ranches across Texas, Wyoming, Montana, and New Mexico. They sent managers. They installed bookkeepers. They expected quarterly reports and annual dividends. They often had no idea what they were dealing with. A group of Englishmen bought into Bell Ranch in the 1870s. The operation continued under Waddingham's direction, then under successive managers. The brand stayed the same. The restructurings kept coming, different names on the letterhead, same cattle on the grass, same wind across the mesa. What is certain is that the ranch that emerged from the syndicate era was different from the ranch that entered it. More organized, more controlled, more modern. The bones of an industrial operation grafted onto a landscape that had known only horses and cattle and wind. 1947. The Second World War is over. America is rebuilding. Soldiers are coming home. The cattle market is shifting. And somewhere in the chain of ownership at Bell Ranch, a decision is made that will reshape the property for the next quarter century. The ranch is divided, 6 tracts, sold off separately to different buyers. Why? The records do not say with certainty. Perhaps estate issues, the complications of passing a property this large to heirs who may not want it or cannot afford to keep it. Perhaps capital needs. The post-war economy offered opportunities that required cash, and land was the asset that could be converted. Perhaps simply the reality that a ranch this size, in country this hard, was difficult to hold together when easier opportunities existed elsewhere. What had been one of the largest contiguous ranches in the American West was suddenly fragments. The brand stayed. The name stayed. But the empire was scattered. Different owners worked different sections. The fences that had held it together now divided it. The apparatus that had made it function as a single unit was broken into pieces that could not coordinate. For 23 years, Bell Ranch existed only in pieces. Some owners ran cattle, some leased pasture, some held on, waiting for prices to rise. The land remembered nothing about who owned it. The wind still blew, the rain still did not fall, the cattle still needed up to 45 acres each to survive. But the headquarters tract remained. About 130,000 acres, give or take, depending on which source you trust. Still enormous by any standard, still branded with the bell, still waiting for someone who could see what it might become. The man who would buy it had not yet arrived. But he was coming. 1970. A businessman named William Lane purchases the headquarters tract of Bell Ranch. Lane was not a cattleman by profession. He was an industrial executive, the kind of man who understood logistics, capital deployment, and long-term planning. The kind of man who looked at a broken empire and saw an opportunity rather than a problem. He did not buy Bell Ranch to run cattle. He bought it to rebuild an empire. Over the next 6 years, Lane bought back the pieces, tract by tract, negotiation by negotiation. Some sellers were eager, some required persuasion, some held out for prices that Lane eventually paid because the alternative was leaving the empire incomplete. By 1976, he had reassembled roughly 290,000 acres, nearly the full extent of the historic ranch. 290,000 acres, 453 square miles, one fence line running 342 miles around the perimeter. One brand, one operation, the empire restored. But reassembly was only the beginning. 23 years of divided ownership had degraded the infrastructure. Fences needed rebuilding. Water systems needed expansion. Handling facilities needed modernization. The ranch did not just need to be reassembled, it needed to be rebuilt. Lane approached this the way an industrial executive would. He looked at the numbers. 530 miles of interior roads, 342 miles of fence, 117 wells and windmills, 206 stock tanks, 90 miles of pipeline moving water to where the cattle needed it, 14 major sets of shipping pens and corrals scattered across the property, 6 sets of certified scales for weighing cattle at sale, a 40-ton truck scale at a facility called Casa Colorado for weighing loaded trucks heading to market. This was not a hobby. This was an engineering project applied to landscape. 1978. William Lane, II, the man who had reassembled Bell Ranch piece by piece over 6 years, who had taken a broken empire and made it whole again, who had invested millions in infrastructure and decades in vision, dies in a car accident near the ranch. The details are sparse in the available records. A road, a vehicle. The kind of accident that happens on rural highways where distances are long and help is far away. He had spent 8 years building something, 6 years buying back the pieces, 2 years after that, consolidating, improving, developing the infrastructure that would define the ranch for the next generation. And then he was gone. Leadership passed to William N. Lane III. The ranch continued. The brand kept burning. The cows kept calving on pastures as big as small states. The windmills kept turning. The data kept flowing. But there is something about a sudden death that changes the story of any enterprise. The empire was no longer a project being built. It was an inheritance being maintained. And inheritances carry different weight than acquisitions. An acquisition is a choice you make. An inheritance is a choice someone made for you. The Lane family would hold Bell Ranch for another 3 decades after William Lane II died, through drought years and wet years, through cattle cycles that made fortunes and broke them, through managers who came and went and left their mark on the infrastructure, through one more tragedy that would shake the family to its foundation. August 15th, 2007, Jeffrey Lane was 57 years old. He had worked at Bell Ranch since 1974, more than 33 years of his life on one piece of ground. He had watched the reassembly. He had lived through the development. He had seen managers come and go, droughts arrive and break, cattle markets rise and fall. He was the ranch president. Local newspapers described him as the absolute definition of a cowboy. He had purchased a small plane 6 days earlier. 6 days. The plane crashed. The National Transportation Safety Board launched an investigation to determine the cause. The specifics became data points in a federal report: aircraft type, weather conditions, pilot experience, mechanical analysis. But the loss was not a data point. The loss was a man who had spent 3 decades learning every canyon, every water point, every problem on 290,000 acres of country. Jeff Lane had been the human embodiment of Bell Ranch for a generation, the working cowboy who was also the owner, the man who rode the country and also signed the checks. The bridge between the old way of ranching, horseback, chuck wagon, tradition, and the data-driven operation the ranch was becoming. His death came 1 year after the Lane family had begun marketing the ranch for sale. 2006. Stewardship sale process begins. The phrase is careful. Stewardship sale, not auction, not liquidation. An invitation to the right buyer to take responsibility for something larger than a cattle operation. An invitation to preserve what the Lanes had rebuilt. And then the president of the ranch, the working cowboy, the man who knew the land better than anyone alive, crashed a plane he had owned for less than a week. The sale continued. What else could it do? The family had made a decision before the crash. The family held to that decision after. But the timing haunts the story. A death and then a departure. A ranch that had taken 2 tragedies, 2 car accidents, 2 plane crashes, 2 sudden endings from the family that had loved it. Chapter 12. When the romance meets the ledger. A ranch this size is defined by its managers as much as its owners. The owners provide capital and set direction. The managers make the daily decisions that accumulate into decades. Albert Mitchell ran Bell Ranch from 1933 to 1947. He became president of the American Hereford Cattle Breeders Association. He served in the New Mexico state legislature. He helped found the American Quarter Horse Association. He was president of New Mexico's Cattle Growers Association. 1 manager, 4 major industry positions. The ranch was not just a ranch during his tenure, it was a platform for shaping the Western cattle industry. George Ellis succeeded Mitchell and ran the operation from 1947 to 1970. Ellis pioneered performance testing on Bell Ranch. He introduced 205-day weights when most ranches still judged cattle entirely by how they looked. Actual data replaced visual appraisal. Numbers replaced intuition. Don Hoffman followed from 1970 to 1986. He oversaw infrastructure, water development, cross-fencing, and handling facilities. The physical bones of the modern operation were built under his direction. Rusty Tinnin led from 1986 to 2006. He expanded the composite breeding program, the Bell Red genetics, and integrated DNA testing and electronic identification. 20 years of taking what Ellis started and pushing it toward modern data-driven ranching. He died in early 2006, just as the stewardship sale began. Another loss in a story marked by sudden endings. Bert Ansell took over as general manager in 2006. A long-time wagon boss who had risen through the ranks over decades on the property. By 2010, he was president of the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association. Another Bell manager following the Mitchell path from ranch to industry leadership. Chris Wilson arrived with Silver Spur after the sale. New ownership, new genetics strategy, new integration with a broader corporate ranching framework. Each manager left a layer: infrastructure, genetics, operations, relationships. The ranch is an accumulation of decisions made by people whose names most beef consumers will never know. The steak on the plate traces back through supply chains, processing plants, feedlots, and ranches to decisions made by managers who are remembered only by their industry peers. Chapter 13, The Sale. Stewardship or Strategy. 2006. The asking price for Bell Ranch is $110 million, livestock not included, $110 million for 290,000 deeded acres, for 530 miles of roads, for 342 miles of fence, for reported 117 wells and windmills, for approximately 206 stock tanks, for roughly 90 miles of pipeline, for a century and a half of history, for a brand that had never stopped burning. The price worked out to roughly $379 per acre. For land that produced cattle at up to 45 acres per pair, that was a substantial premium over pure agricultural value. The buyer would be paying for the brand, for the infrastructure, for the continuity, for the opportunity to own something that could not be replicated. 2008, the financial crisis hits. Lehman Brothers collapses. Credit markets freeze. The buyers who might have written 9-figure checks are suddenly managing portfolios underwater, watching equity evaporate, wondering if the world is ending. The land market, which had been hot, turns cold. Ranch buyers who had competed for trophy properties in 2006 were not competing in 2008. They were surviving. The price drops to $99 million. 2009. The recession deepens, unemployment rises, credit remains tight. The ranch brokers adjust expectations. The price drops again. By 2010, Bell Ranch is listed at $83 million, a discount of $27 million from the original ask. $27 million written off by market conditions, by timing, by the brutal reality that land is only worth what someone will pay for it on the day you need to sell. The Lane family watched the price drop. They did not have to sell. They could have pulled the listing, waited for markets to recover, tried again in 3 years or 5 years, or whenever the world returned to normal. Properties this size can sit unsold for years. The carrying costs are manageable for a family that already owns the land, free and clear. But they had made a decision. The stewardship sale was not just about getting the best price. It was about finding the right buyer, transferring the ranch to someone who would continue what the family had built. And somewhere in that calculation, waiting indefinitely did not serve the goal. The buyers who looked at Bell Ranch during those years came with different intentions. Some wanted a trophy property, a legacy to leave their children, a place to hunt and ride and feel like a rancher without doing the work. Some wanted agricultural investment, productive acreage that would generate returns while appreciating in value. Some wanted development potential, the ability to subdivide, to parcel, to extract value by breaking the ranch apart. The Lane family rejected some offers outright. Buyers who did not meet their criteria for stewardship, buyers who might have paid more but would have destroyed what the ranch represented. This was not a fire sale. This was a careful transition, even as the price dropped and the recession dragged on. What they were selling was not just land. It was continuity. It was an operation that had been built over generations. It was the promise that the Bell brand would keep burning into hides, that the cowboys would keep riding, that the infrastructure would keep functioning for whoever came next. That promise has value, but it does not have a line item on the spreadsheet. For the Lane family, this was not an abstraction. This was 3 generations of work repriced by strangers on Wall Street who would never walk the ground. This was a legacy valued not by what it had cost to build, but by what the market would bear in the worst economic conditions since the Great Depression. But at $83 million, a buyer appeared. The Lane family did not list Bell Ranch on the open market like a suburban house. They conducted what they called a stewardship sale, a process designed to find not just a buyer, but the right buyer. What does right mean when you are selling 290,000 acres? It does not mean highest bidder. A developer could have subdivided the ranch into ranchettes and made more money per acre than any cattle operation would ever generate. The numbers would work on a spreadsheet. The land would be destroyed as a working ranch forever. It does not mean any operator with cash. Someone could buy Bell Ranch, push the stocking rate past sustainable limits, make money for 5 years, and leave the grass destroyed for the next generation. Legal, profitable in the short term, devastating in the long term. The stewardship sale sought someone who would continue what the Lanes had built, someone with capital to maintain the infrastructure, someone with expertise to manage the operation, someone with the patience to think in decades rather than quarters. This limits the buyer pool dramatically. At $83 million, or $110 million when the process started, how many people in the world meet all those criteria? The answer is very few. The market for legacy ranches at this scale is thin. A handful of ultra-wealthy individuals, a smaller handful of institutional investors with the right philosophy, family offices managing multi-generational wealth, conservation organizations in some cases. The Lane family waited through the recession. They dropped the price. They talked to prospects who toured the property, rode the pastures, examined the books, and walked away. They held on until the right buyer appeared. Whether John Malone and Silver Spur represent the ideal steward is a question only time will answer. They have the capital. They have the expertise. They have the scale to absorb a property this size into a functioning operation. What they may not have is the emotional connection that 3 generations of Lanes built. But perhaps emotional connection is not what the land needs. Perhaps what the land needs is competent management and sustainable stocking rates and infrastructure maintained to spec. Perhaps love is overrated when it comes to ranching 453 square miles of dry country. Perhaps not. John Malone was not looking for a hobby. The chairman of Liberty Media, a billionaire whose fortune came from cable television, media holdings, and a career of building and consolidating communications companies, had assembled one of the largest private land portfolios in the United States. More than 2 million acres across multiple states, ranches, forests, conservation properties. His company, Silver Spur Ranches, operated multiple properties across the West. This was not a man who bought land to look at it. This was a man who bought operations. 2010. Bell Ranch changes hands. Silver Spur takes possession. The new management arrived with a thesis. Blend technology with tradition. Refine the genetics. Build a cow-to-carcass tracking infrastructure that could follow a calf from birth in a New Mexico pasture to slaughter at a packing plant and back again, as data, feedback loops that would improve the herd generation after generation. Silver Spur ran about 12,000 commercial cows across its holdings, multiple ranches, multiple registered bull programs, a composite breed called Rangefire, designed for rough country, genetics engineered for the specific challenges of semi-arid western ranching. Bell Ranch would become part of that framework, not a standalone operation, a node in a network. A new manager arrived with the new ownership. Chris Wilson, previously of the Matador Ranch in Texas, another legendary property with its own century of history. Wilson brought genetics shifts. The Bell Red composite that the Lane family had developed would gradually give way to Red Angus influence. The ranch would move from its homegrown program toward integration with Silver Spur's broader breeding strategy. Some traditions would survive the transition, others would not. The question, always the question when ownership changes, is which traditions serve the operation and which are simply comfort, which practices exist because they work, and which exist only because they have always existed. Chapter 14. What it cost the land. When Silver Spur took possession of Bell Ranch, the genetics program faced a fundamental question: continue what worked, or integrate into a larger framework. The Bell Red composite had been developed over decades, a blend of English and continental genetics with a touch of Brahmin influence, cattle designed specifically for the challenges of northeastern New Mexico, heat tolerance, foraging efficiency, the ability to walk up to 45 acres for every bite of grass and still produce a calf worth selling. But Silver Spur had its own genetics program, Red Angus influence, a composite called Range Fire developed across multiple ranches, an approach designed not for one property but for a portfolio of properties spanning different states, different climates, different challenges. The shift would be gradual. No operation purges its breeding program overnight. But the direction was clear. Bell Ranch would move from standalone genetics to integrated genetics. From a program developed by and for this specific piece of ground to a program developed for Western ranching broadly. Whether this is good or bad depends on your perspective. From an efficiency standpoint, standardization makes sense. Bulls can move between properties. Data can aggregate across herds. Best practices can spread through the operation. From a specificity standpoint, something is lost. The Bell Red was not a generic composite. It was a composite for Bell Ranch, for this elevation, this rainfall, this grass, this terrain. Decades of selection pressure had shaped it for conditions that exist nowhere else in exactly the same combination. This is the trade-off that corporate ownership brings to historic properties. Capital, expertise, operations that have been tested across multiple properties, but also standardization, integration, the loss of what made this place different from every other place. The data will eventually show which approach produces better results. But data cannot measure everything. It cannot measure whether the ranch feels the same to the men who work it. It cannot measure whether the continuity that the brand represents extends to the genetics beneath the brand. The bell still burns into hides. But the cattle wearing that brand are changing, generation by generation, into something their predecessors would not recognize. Chapter 15. What It Gave Back. Spring of 2012. 2 years after the sale closed. For 4 weeks, a chuck wagon rolled across Bell Ranch, pulled by a pair of bell-bred quarter horses. Cooking for the crews working spring roundup, feeding cowboys who slept under canvas and rode pastures that stretched to every horizon. This was not a marketing stunt. This was a decision. The new ownership had the resources to run the entire operation with pickup trucks and modern trailers. They could have retired the chuck wagon to a museum. They could have streamlined everything, stripped out anything that did not contribute directly to efficiency. Instead, they brought it back. The ranch manager explained it simply. Keeping and bringing back traditions was part of the stewardship. The historic structures on the property, the original headquarters buildings, the corrals built a century earlier, were maintained rather than replaced. The physical history was preserved even as the operational models evolved. This is the tension that defines Bell Ranch in its current form. A corporate ownership structure with deep pockets, a data-driven breeding program that tracks genetics across generations, frameworks designed for efficiency at industrial scale, and a chuck wagon rolling across the mesa in spring the way it has for 150 years. Cowboys eating beef and beans around a fire, the way their predecessors ate beef and beans around a fire when the brand was new. Tradition and technology are not opposites here. They are both tools. The question is always which tool serves the land, which tool serves the operation, which tool preserves what deserves preserving. The chuck wagon is not efficient, but the chuck wagon is Bell Ranch. And some things are worth keeping not because they make money, but because they make meaning. The cow-calf operation is the core of what Bell Ranch produces. Calves are born on the ranch, weaned on the ranch, and then, under Silver Spur's ownership model, retained through finishing in many cases rather than sold at weaning. The operation markets fed cattle as natural, non-hormone-treated beef. The targets are specific: 85% choice grade, mid-60s dressing percentage. These numbers matter because they translate directly to price. A calf that grades choice brings more money per pound than a calf that grades select. The difference can be tens of dollars per hundredweight, which adds up across thousands of head. A carcass that dresses at 65% yields more saleable beef from each live weight pound than one that dresses at 60%. 5 percentage points of dressing percentage across a 1,200-pound animal is 60 pounds of difference. At beef prices, that is money. The data flows backward from the packing plant. Carcass results feed into breeding decisions made years earlier. Bulls that sire calves with better grades get used more. Cows that produce underperforming offspring get culled. Target cow size. Under the new management, 1,150 to 1,200 pounds. An animal large enough to raise a substantial calf, but not so large that she burns too much grass, maintaining her own body weight through the year. The expectation is that each cow should wean about 50% of her body weight annually. A 1,200-pound cow should produce a 600-pound calf at weaning. But those expectations flex with grass years versus dry years. In drought, everything shrinks. Weaning weights drop because the grass could not support heavier calves. Cows lose body condition because they gave everything to their calves. The math that made sense when the rains came in July becomes fiction by October if the rains never arrived. The land sets the rules. The rancher follows them or pays the price. The price is always paid by the cattle first, then by the grass, then by the balance sheet. A cow-calf operation is the beginning of a journey, not the end. The calf born on Bell Ranch in March will not become a steak until the following year. Understanding where that calf goes and who profits at each step reveals the economics that drive every decision. First, the ranch. The cow grazes Bell's grass. The calf is born. The calf nurses. The calf grows. By October, the calf weighs 500 to 600 pounds and goes to market as a weaned calf. The ranch receives a check. This is where most cow-calf operations end. But that weaned calf still has gain to achieve. It goes to a stocker operation, a ranch or feedlot that specializes in growing calves from weaning weight to feeder weight. The stocker adds 200 to 300 pounds over several months, then sells the animal again. Then the feedlot. The feeder cattle arrive at 800 pounds and leave at 1,200 or 1,300 pounds. This is where the final weight is added, where the marbling is developed, where the animal is finished for slaughter. Then the packing plant. The animal is processed. The carcass is graded, prime, choice, select, or lower. The cuts are packaged. The beef enters the food supply. Each step has different economics. Each step has different margins. Each step has different risks. The cow-calf operator takes the risk of the cow not breeding, the calf not surviving, the grass not growing, the market not holding. The stocker takes the risk of the animal not gaining, getting sick, the price dropping between purchase and sale. The feedlot takes the risk of feed costs spiking, cattle prices falling, a disease outbreak closing markets. Silver Spur changed Bell's position in this chain. Instead of selling weaned calves at auction and letting someone else capture the value of the remaining steps, Silver Spur retains ownership through finishing. The calf born on Bell stays in the Silver Spur framework all the way to the packing plant. This captures more value. It also concentrates more risk. If the cattle market crashes after you have committed to feeding an animal for another year, you absorb the loss that a traditional cow-calf operator would have avoided by selling at weaning. The Silver Spur approach targets specific markets: natural beef, non-hormone-treated cattle, carcass specifications that command premium prices, 85% choice or better, mid-60s on dressing percentage. These premiums exist because consumers will pay more for beef with certain attributes, and Silver Spur has built an operation to deliver those attributes consistently. This is where the data comes back: the electronic ear tags, the DNA tests, the carcass data from the packing plant. Silver Spur can trace which cow produced which calf graded prime versus choice, which genetics consistently hit the targets, and which consistently miss. The feedback loop closes. The data from the packing plant informs breeding decisions at the ranch. The animals that grade well are bred again. The animals that miss the targets are culled. Generation by generation, the herd shifts toward the specifications the market rewards. This is industrial agriculture with a Western face. The horses still work, the brandings still happen, the chuck wagon still rolls, but behind the tradition is a supply chain engineered for efficiency and margin capture. Whether that is progress or loss depends on what you think a ranch is for. Chapter 16. The Ranch Outlasts the Owner. What does it mean to own a place like Bell Ranch? What does it mean to hold title to 453 square miles of dry country that will outlast you, that has outlasted everyone who came before you, that will outlast everyone who comes after? The legal answer is simple. Ownership means a deed. It means the right to exclude others, to use the land as you choose within the law, to sell it or pass it to heirs or let it sit until someone takes it from you. The practical answer is more complicated. Responsibility means wells that need maintaining. It means fences that need mending. It means cattle that need feeding when the grass runs out. It means employees who depend on you for their livelihoods. It means decisions that accumulate into decades. The philosophical answer is complicated beyond measure. Does anyone truly own a landscape this ancient? Or does the landscape simply tolerate our presence, waiting for us to leave? The peoples who lived here before the land grant understood something that deeded ownership tends to obscure. The land is not ours. We are temporary. The land is permanent. Our relationship with the land is a negotiation, not a conquest. The land sets terms. We accept them or suffer the consequences. The Lanes understood this in their way. 3 generations of careful stewardship, conservative stocking that left grass for bad years, infrastructure investment that made the operation function, a sale process designed to find a buyer who would continue the work rather than liquidate it. Silver Spur understands this in their way. Capital deployed for long-term production, technology integrated for efficiency. A framework designed to survive the death of any individual owner because the framework is larger than any individual. But understanding is not the same as permanence. Silver Spur will sell Bell Ranch someday. Every owner sells eventually, or dies, or loses the ability to hold on. The question is never whether the ownership will change. The question is only when, and to whom, and what condition the land will be in when the next owner arrives. This is the gift and the burden of land stewardship. You inherit something you did not create. You manage it for a time. You pass it to someone you may never meet. Your legacy is not what you took from the land. Your legacy is what condition you left it in. The grass can be overgrazed in a decade and take 50 years to recover. The water infrastructure can be neglected for a season and fail for a generation. The knowledge of how to work this specific piece of country, the micro-habitats, the water patterns, the cattle behavior in drought versus wet years, can be lost in a single transition and take decades to rebuild. Every owner of Bell Ranch has faced this question. Will I leave it better than I found it, or worse? Will I be remembered as a steward or an extractor? Will the land thank you for my time or recover from it? The land does not answer. The land waits. 1824. A grant, 1875. A brand, 1947. A fracture, 1970. A reassembly, 1978. A death, 2007. Another death, 2010. A sale. The timeline fits on an index card. The lives it represents do not. 200 years since Pablo Montoya signed his name to a piece of paper. Mexican government, American courts, English syndicates, industrial executives, media billionaires. The ownership changes. The land does not. The land does not remember Pablo Montoya. The land does not remember Wilson Waddingham, or the English syndicate, or William Lane, too, or his son who crashed a plane he had owned for 6 days. The land does not remember drought years or wet years, or the price of cattle in any particular October. The land remembers nothing. The land simply is. 453 square miles, 15 inches of rain in a good year, up to 45 acres for every cow. These are not opinions, these are facts. The land sets them, the rancher accepts them, the wind across the caprock, the Canadian River cutting canyons through red rock, the petroglyphs watching from the cliffs, left by people who understood this country before anyone thought to own it. The Bell brand still burns into hides. The chuck wagon still rolls in spring. The data still flows from electronic tags to breeding decisions that will shape the herd for years to come. Somewhere on the ranch right now a windmill turns, a tank fills, a cow drinks. The work continues. The owners will change again. They always do. The empire will be sold or divided or passed to heirs who may or may not understand what they have inherited. The price will fluctuate, the drought will come and go, the cattle market will rise and fall, but the land will still be there, dry, vast, indifferent, waiting for the next person who believes they can hold it, waiting to see how long they last, waiting, as the land always waits, to outlast them all.